It's a weird way to break it up, maybe. Having one chapter and then a second chapter in there together. We don't normally do that. But we've been talking about that on Wednesday nights of how Paul didn't put the chapters and verses in there. Those were added later. And sometimes whenever you put those in there, you break up some thoughts that really should be connected. And I think there's a whole lot more that could be connected there. But this is an important passage. And I think it fits together nicely how we read it. It speaks to knowing and evaluating, I would say yourself, but he's using the ecclesial us. He's speaking to everybody. But it mentions the tendency maybe to give ourselves a favorable evaluation and deceive ourselves. But it also, or an overly favorable evaluation. But it also speaks to our tendency, and maybe even a little bit of a need, to know and evaluate others. How to address sin in others. But we need to put that evaluation of ourselves and others in its proper place. Because sometimes we tend to give ourselves a little bit too favorable of an opinion, and maybe are a little too hard on others. But I like the phrase that he uses here, for us to be in step with the Spirit. And so for Paul, it was a reference to soldiers marching. It's a uniting thing, right? Soldiers, they march and they move together in the same direction, in the same step. They left at the right at the same time, right at the same time. And if Full Metal Jacket taught me anything, they also sing a wildly inappropriate song together as they go. But it's a very uniting thing. Same direction. They're wearing the same uniforms. They look exactly the same. And so it's this really uniting thing. And so that's what the original hearers would have heard when they heard the phrase, in step. But where are my band nerds at? Any band nerds that hear the phrase, in step? I remember being in step in band. These guys know. You got to be, you don't want to be out of step. You know, if you're out of step, you kind of stand out. People might see you. It might draw attention. And you actually don't want that attention drawn on yourself. You want everybody to look exactly the same. And it looks nice that way. And again, it's the same thing. You're wearing the same uniform. You're going in the same direction. You're playing the same song. You don't want to stand out. When I think of In Step, I just got to give the Aggie Band a shout out. If you ever want to see a really great band, watch the Aggie Band. Something Jerry Hurtenberger used to say is, hey, Aggies, they don't win every football game, but they always win halftime. They're an awesome band, and you will see what it means to be completely in step. But that's a cool thing to think about, a church being fully in step with the Spirit. Everybody moving in the same way, in the same direction. You hate to use the word uniform, but you don't want to go against what the Spirit's doing. You don't want the Spirit to be moving this way and you be marching all goofy and out of step, going the other way. And maybe not only going against where the Spirit is moving, but maybe where the rest of the church is moving as well. And so this is a really cool analogy that Paul uses for being fully united and moving in the same direction with the Spirit and with the people of God. We want the Spirit to lead our hearts, our thoughts, our movements, our direction. Then he says, let's not be conceited. Let's not be conceited. Let's not be overly into ourselves. Let's not have this inflated sense of how important we are. So it's saying, don't over-evaluate how good you are. Because one of the dangers in that is when you do that, you become competitive. You start comparing yourself with others, and it speaks into that. Let's not compare. And if you attempt to prove how great you are, how important you are, by seeking status, kind of trying to get what you feel you deserve, what you start doing is you start attempting to put others under you. You start trying to stand out and look more important. And that's the other thing about being in step, whether it be in band or the military. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. I remember, I won't name him, but I know another, someone here who went through boot camp. He said one of the most important things is to not draw any attention to yourself. You want to go through and never get noticed and get finished. And that's kind of how it is with being in step sometimes. But sometimes we have this desire to excel or be above or be better. And there's a danger in that. You being overly into yourself or overly evaluating your importance hurts the community. It hurts the community in a lot of ways. And so it mentions, again, in chapter 6, verse 3, it says, if anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they are deceiving themselves. And it's interesting because a lot of us have, it's almost human nature. We generally have a tendency to give ourselves a better evaluation than is often true. Really, with anything, you say, hey, I did better than maybe you actually did. And we tend to be easier on ourselves and harder on others. In psychology, they call this the self-serving bias. Basically, it explains it pretty good on the screen here. Success is due to my own abilities. If I fail, it's someone else's fault. So if you made I always hated in school lab work when you had to do a lab with a group. And, I always told myself when we made a good grade, those guys were lucky to have me in there. I kind of pulled the weight there. But if we made a bad grade, it was their fault for not helping enough, right? Or think like a quarterback. If a quarterback has a good game, it's because they were just on fire and throwing nice, accurate passes and, reading the defense. But if they have a bad day, the receivers were running bad routes. They were dropping passes. There wasn't any blocking. And so it's someone else's fault. So really what this is about, it's about preserving self-esteem, which can have its place. Some will tell you this is there's a little bit of healthiness to looking at it this way, but it's really not good for taking responsibility. And it's really bad for personal growth. And it's not very good for relationships. It's putting a blinder on to our own weaknesses. It's making us not see ourselves for who we truly are. And then if we lash out and blame others, it's hurting relationships. And so it has this unwillingness to take responsibility, and it makes us lie to ourselves. And maybe we don't even know we're responsible. We're talking about self-awareness. Maybe we aren't even aware that we're doing that. But what's interesting is being in a close relationship tends to reduce this self-serving bias. So the closer you are to someone, the less likely you are to say, oh, well, all the good comes from me and all the bad is all your fault. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for that. One is in a close relationship, we become more empathetic. We become more understanding. There's more give and take. But really, another part of it is, if you really want to be in a close relationship, you have to reduce the self-serving bias. No one's going to be in a close relationship with you if you're responsible for all the good and everything bad is their problem and it's always their fault. If you want to be in a relationship, you're going to have to get rid of this a little bit. You're going to have to tame it a little bit. But close relationships also tend to show us a mirror of ourselves. They tend to show us who we really are. You learn about yourself through a close relationship. You learn about your annoying behaviors. You know about your mannerisms. You see how people react to you, and you kind of learn, okay, what am I really doing here? So it's in our relationships with others that we really learn the most about ourselves. Relationships show us a mirror to ourselves and help us to see the things that we're unaware of, maybe even our flaws. So think about a relationship that you've had that has shown you a lot about yourself. And unfortunately, maybe through conflict. Maybe a lot of time it's through conflict. One of my best friends in middle school, he lived across the street from me. We hung out all the time. We really were like brothers. Super tight friend. We fought like brothers too. And one time in one of our fights, he told me, you know that cocky jerk at school that you can't stand, who's so arrogant and thinks he's better than everybody and puts everybody down? You're worse than he is. You're just as arrogant. You're more arrogant. And I remember the self-serving bias in me was like, oh, he doesn't mean that. He's just being emotional. That's not true. But then in a moment of clarity, I was like, oh my goodness. Maybe he's right. Maybe there really is this part of me that is very arrogant and very conceited. And maybe that's why I can't stand seeing it in this other guy. It's because I'm seeing the same flaw in myself that I don't want to address. And so rather than address it and deal with it, I see it in other people and I get mad about it. And I want to pick them apart and not face myself. at all. I think we do that. I think it's almost a human nature thing to do that, to see our flaws in others and pick it apart, but not address it in ourselves. And that was one of the first times I kind of realized, like, oh, maybe I have that issue. In my marriage, I've learned that I still have that issue. But it's in marriage relationships, right, where we learn a lot about ourselves. I've learned in marriage to change a lot of habits that are thoughtless, that are selfish, that are unkind. My wife and others have on multiple occasions told me that, showed me my lack of self-awareness and some of my nonverbal behaviors that are sending bad messages. And you need relationship, you need community to show you this stuff. Hey, you look like a jerk right now. You should stop. That's important, even though it's hard to hear, right? So we have this bias where we give ourselves favorable opinions, but we need God and we need others to help us to see the things that we don't always want to see. And that's where chapter 6, verse 1 comes in. You know, if someone's caught in a sin, we should restore them gently. We are actually here to help people, to help them see the things they refuse to see, to address the things they don't want to address. But it says, see that you don't get caught up in that same sin as well, which I've always kind of heard that and thought, like, yeah, if someone's struggling with addiction and you go to try to walk through them with this addiction, don't get caught up in the addiction. And I think that's true. I think that's part of what it's saying. But I also think it's kind of saying that because it's saying, hey, usually the sin you see in other people, that's probably one you're dealing with. There's probably something in you that has that same struggle. And it's really a very similar teaching. It's pretty much the same concept as what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. We're really quick to see the speck in our brother's eye when we ourselves have this plank or this log in our own. That's why I got that picture up there. Because it's human nature to do that. Human nature to pick apart others, but not yourself. And that makes community hard. Community is sometimes difficult. Being with people is really challenging. Imagine being in a community where nobody looks at themselves, but is just nitpicking everybody else. Maybe we've been there before. But we get our feelings hurt, and sometimes we feel like being in community isn't even worth it. And I've seen people kind of walk down that path. I hear all the time, I heard it this week. You don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And I get that sentiment, and there's a part of me that really wants to argue with that. But then there's another part of me that says, oh, this is a person who's been hurt. This is a person who struggles with community. And so it kind of makes me sad to hear that. And there's a part of me where I think, okay, maybe community failed you, but also all community is difficult. Have you ever been to middle school? It's not just church people. I really get annoyed whenever they're like, oh, church people are so bad. All community is hard. Because all community, at some point, will show you a mirror. It will show you this is who you are. It will show you, hey, this thing you're doing is unbecoming. All community does that, not just church. And so it is difficult. What I want you to hear today is community. The faith community is worth it. Being an intimate and loved part of a community is worth it. Even when it's painful, even when it's difficult. Because the pain is part of growth. So please don't run when you've been hurt. And please know it's not just church people. Don't give up on community. And I'll say, and I definitely don't want to put this message out there that's saying hey, let's go on witch hunts and start picking people apart and being the mirror to everybody. That's definitely not what I want you to hear. What I want you to hear is, hey, let's self-reflect on us first. Let's look inward first. And when you catch yourself picking someone else apart, probably the first thing you need to do is say, is that something in me? Is that a problem in me? Eventually there is a place maybe to address issues in other people, but man, we need to be careful. Don't do it in a fit of rage, and it really needs to come in a loving relationship. I'm way more likely to hear criticisms from someone that I know really loves me, and someone that I know, even though there's this broken, gross part of me, even though they see it, I know they still love me anyway. I'm pretty willing to hear that. I'm pretty willing to adjust my behavior based on that. So as painful of a process as it is, it's really a good thing. It really shapes us and shapes our community and shapes relationships. And so this morning, what I want you to hear is let's self-reflect, but don't give up on community. Let's accept the hard parts of community, knowing that it is an opportunity for growth. If you are here this morning and you want to become an official member of this community, if you want to give your life to Christ, if you have any needs, if you need any prayers, this is a loving community of people who want to honor that. So if you have any need, come now together. We stand and sing.